Hi, I'm John Vorperian, and this is Beyond the Game. What is the most controversial call in sports? Well, it's not Babe Ruth's called shot, or the 1972 Soviet win over the American basketball team at the Olympics. No, it is the long count. The retention of Jay Tunney's heavyweight crown over Jack Dempsey, and with me to talk about the boxer and the prizefighter who formed a relationship with one of the greatest playwrights of the 20th century, George Bernard Shaw. Indeed, it's a pleasure to have in studio Jay Tunney to talk about his dad and this curious relationship with Shaw. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
This is a special episode because we're coming into St. Paddy's Day and the like, and for the Irish people, it's a pleasure to talk to you about two icons of the 20th century, your dad and Shaw. How was it that a mere boxer was able to relate with George Bernard Shaw?
Well, it's a good question. Very, very good question. Yeah, I think they related in many ways, but they didn't really know how they related until they related through boxing. And Shaw had written a book, interestingly, before he became a playwright, called Cashel Byron's Profession. And this was about an Irish boxer who became world champion. And he wrote it not because he just was crazy about boxing all the time. He wrote it because he really thought that it would kick a book out across the counter because people related to sports. But the more he got into it, the more he really took to boxing, and it related to his spirit, his Irish spirit, his fighting spirit. And he loved the book by the time he finished with it. And the man he created, Cashel Byron, turned out 50 years later to the living flesh and blood of Cashel Byron suddenly was there in front of him in the form of Jay Tunney, world heavyweight boxing champion, about 1926. Yeah,
Jay Tunney, who put away Jack Dempsey, but surprisingly, and this is both, I guess, a curse and a blessing that he ran into. He was a man of letters, so to speak. He lectured at Yale University.
Yes, he did.
And it was not uncommon for him to interact with the news media of the day, but yet they kept, the media would actually discuss with him issues other than sports, and yet it always came back to his reading habits they seemed to focus on. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, the reading habits were something that Dad developed even when he was in the Marine Corps during the First World War, and he boxed then, and in between the fights and in between when he was training and whatever, he was reading. He had not gone through formal school. He had to quit when he was 15 because of economics. His mother and father needed him to work instead of going to school. This is in Greenwich Village, New York. The father was a longshoreman. And so Dad decided to be an autodidact, which is become a self-educated man. And so he took to reading. And he found out that reading helped him box because of soothing the nerves. One of the hardest things about boxers between fights are the nerves. You're always jittery, you're always worried about the fight that's coming up. And Dad used to love to read. He started with Shakespeare in a big way, because it made his mind soar, and it took his mind off the coming fight. And so as this went on, the newsmen got on to Jay Tunney, that Jay Tunney was a guy that liked to read. What is this? And a lot of the newsmen, a lot of the sportscasters didn't like it. Number one, they thought they were the writers and the wordsmiths. What does this guy think he's doing? He didn't even go to college. But anyway, they found it hard to forgive this fighter. They wanted in the ring a scrapper. They didn't want a student necessarily in the ring. But Dad said, "Look, this helps me." And they said, "Oh, really?" He says, "Yeah, it does. I can understand the sport intellectually. Have you figured out, my opponent figured out, before he even gets in the ring. I approach the sport intellectually as well as physically. Brains over brawn, if you will." And it carried him right through, and he became a boxing champion with probably the finest record in boxing history. 77 wins and 1 loss. He did have 1 tie, but nobody could beat that. So he did pretty well with that brains over brawn kind of thing.